All right, welcome back. I'm here with Matt Sigelman, the CEO of Burning Glass. Matt, how you doing?
Very good. So great to be with you, Al. Thanks for
Yeah,
having
yeah, of course. Great being with you. I mean, when we explored the topic, I'm like, who do we have to have? And certainly, given how long you have been innovating in this area, Burning Glass, just needed to be part of it. So I appreciate you supporting us and being willing to share today. So if you would introduce yourself and a little bit about Burning Glass.
Fantastic. Well, Matt Sigelman, I'm CEO of Burning Glass. And for those of you not familiar with Burning Glass, we have a unique point of view on the world of people analytics. And that's informed by the work that we do collecting literally billions of job openings and then creating a language, a set of ontologies for being able to decode them.
Wow.
Similarly, work that we're doing collecting hundreds of millions of people's career histories, and likewise gives us this real sense of exactly where's the market moving, what jobs are in demand, but more importantly, what skills are changing within those jobs, and where the dynamism of the market is, and what companies need to do to be skilled, to be future ready, to have the skills that they need for the future.
Yeah, there you go. Well, you have at it, and we'll talk towards the end. That sound good?
Fantastic, great. So I'm going to just share my screen, and for the next 20 or so minutes, I'm going to throw a lot of data at you. I always tell people I'm not very interesting, but our data sure are. And so you see my email address down there. If anyone wants a copy of this, you don't need to screen print it. You can just send me an email. I'll be glad to send it your way. What I want to really do is talk about the idea of a genome of jobs. And first of all, again, just a brief introduction to the firm. I think we talked about what we do, the core data substrate that we use, and again, we use that to help companies with their role architecture, for their strategic workforce planning, and ultimately to develop mobility pathways, promotion pathways, and the like. And do this for almost 1,000 organizations, hundreds of employers, of government agencies, of education institutions. But let's actually go straight into it, right? Ultimately, one of the things that we've learned from analyzing as much data as we have is that jobs actually have a genome, and that genome is skills. It's a really important insight because we tend to think about jobs. Look, it's a natural container. People work in jobs, but jobs are moved by skills. When you look at billions of jobs, you realize that actually it's the skills that define jobs. It's the skills that define the dynamism of jobs, and it's skills that define the distance between talent pools. Now, when you think about skills, if we were having this conversation a year ago, we would be talking about the skill gap. And it seems a little weird when you've had tens of millions of people who have been displaced, who are sitting on the sidelines, whose lives have been disrupted, to say, okay, well, we're talking about a skill gap. The strange thing is our data actually tell us that the skills gap's gotten worse over the course of the pandemic, not better. And it actually sort of makes a lot of sense. If you have a million displaced waiters and waitresses will not fill a single cybersecurity engineer job, right? So, there was always a skills gap. It was always more than one skills gap, even from the peak of the economy. Some analysis we did for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce about a year and a half ago, where we found that in the peak of the economy, just as there were some parts of the economy, there were literally 50% more jobs than there were workers to fill them. There were other parts of the economy where was the other way around. The bigger story then is this: not that there's a skill gap that persists. That makes sense. Not that skill gap has gotten worse. Again, it makes sense when you think about it. When you start hiring back, who you're going to hire for, not the people you let go, but it's going to be the people who have the future skills that were already hard to get. But the bigger story here is the pace of change in skills inside an organization. There are actually literally some jobs where literally 40% of the skills have been changing over the last few years. And that's a profound rate of change, and it doesn't line up with the pipelines of talent into jobs. And just to sort of parse that apart, even in some parts of the world, like the tech and data spectrum, there can be very different rates of change. Here's sort of a score of what we call intrasimilarity. I love this audience because I can geek out here. But you'll see there's some jobs that are changing super fast, and some jobs actually literally are like half as fast. terms of how they're changing. So let's look at, for example, those jobs, the clinical data managers in the far left. And if you look at what's changing, and this is what's most interesting, right? So it's not just that they're jobs that are changing super fast. We're all used to that. We're also used to the idea that, okay, well, tech stacks change, so people need to learn new skills. But what we're actually seeing is much more profound than that, because what you're seeing is that the skills that are changing here, right? Like, look at this job. First of all, interesting, it's even clinical data managers within the tech and data spectrum. They're moving the fastest, and not software engineers in some advanced field. But second, that what you're really seeing is not just tech stack changes, right? It's people management skills going up within that job, biologics industry knowledge, clinical research going up within that job. In general, what this reflects is a profound change, and that's really making it difficult to fill roles. But also, more than that, it's changing how we think about work. And that's that increasingly skills are starting to hybridize. You're starting to see skills from more than one domain intersect inside roles. And think about marketing managers, great example, right? We all know plenty of people in marketing. They're nice folks, they're right brain folks. Now all of a sudden we want marketing people to be able to manipulate customer data. You take a marketing manager overall and you make her, one of the fastest clearing professional jobs, pays about $77,000 a year. You want your marketing manager to know SQL. And that job goes to, so something as basic as SQL, and that job goes from $77,000 to over $100,000 a year. It goes from filling really quickly to taking forever to get filled. Why? Because you're intersecting, you're asking people to wear different sets of hats. Don't normally get one on the same head. You're intersecting two parts of a Venn diagram with a very small intersection. So on the one hand, we're hearing about these kind of breathless headlines about, like, 2/3 of us are going to work by 2030 in jobs that haven't been born yet. And what you're seeing is some of that going on. Like, look, I'm sure some data scientists on this call, or people we have friends who are data scientists. Those are jobs that didn't exist a decade ago. Almost 50,000 job openings for data scientists in the U.S. alone last year. Good paying jobs. So there's certainly some of these new jobs getting born, but actually for the most part, the bigger stories, which you're seeing on the right, is just sort of the advent of, in this case, data analytics skills in this example, right? 2012, there were only about 20 occupations that required intensive data analytics skills. About 300, representing about 300,000 job openings last year. That was almost 70, and about 1.1 million. So overall, this idea that new skills are intersecting or hybridizing the job market is a big deal. And it's bearing out in a whole bunch of these new combinations. Essentially, jobs are having sex. And you're seeing, like, okay, big data and analytics intersecting. Okay, well, to some extent, that creates some new roles, the ones on the right, but you're also seeing these new skills that are, in most cases, more profoundly growing. The intersection of design and development, of sales and tech, of disruptive digital, of regulatory, and pretty much anything. All those are really changing things, and therefore changing the pipeline and changing how we think about talent. Now, that was all before the pandemic. Now look what's been going on during the pandemic. And by the way, not just in the data science jobs and the other fast-moving jobs, picked here to professional level job, product managers and actuaries. And actuaries in general have not been a fast-changing job. And on the other side, looking at non-professional insurance claims, production, tech jobs. And what we're doing is comparing what are the job requirements of that job today versus what they were just a year ago. When you see, let's look at those. Let's look at those actuaries, right? Again, job that has been a fairly static job over the years, and you've seen literally just over the space of the pandemic a doubling of demand within those jobs for R, data science, dramatic increase in demand for Power BI skills, and basic auditing and claims knowledge, and that kind of stuff is going down within those roles. So fundamentally, they're getting reshaped by new sets of skills. So how do you figure it out as you start thinking about what you need to be preparing for? What's the future of your workforce? How do you architect for them? A lot of it comes down to being able to track which skills are actually most disruptive. There's a helpful framework. It's nice and simple, like most frameworks. They're helpful, which is looking at what are the skills that are already hard to fill and what are the ones that are growing fast. So here's in the world of data science. This is a spectrum where everything seems to be moving super fast, and yet there are some sets of skills that are more disruptive than others. They're already causing pain, and they're going to grow even faster, and so that's kind of knock over the apple cart. Part of this then is also looking ahead. I call this the Walter Gretzky School of Talent Development. Somebody pointed out to me recently, it wasn't Wayne, it was his dad Walter, who famously said you got to skate to where the puck is going on the ice. Well, if you're going to do that, how do you figure out what's changing? If you would look here, this is cybersecurity skills. You look at what skills are most in demand in the world of cybersecurity today. It's not these. But there's certain sets of skills that are that by our projection models are experiencing rates of growth that are well outside of the rates of growth that you're seeing in other parts of. So, for example, most IoT jobs, most cyber jobs are still in protecting networks, in hardware and in internal networks. Increasingly, data is up in the cloud. We're thinking about distributed networks like IoT. And so you're seeing a very different profile of sets of skills. If you can look ahead to that, then you can start to build the workforce that you need, but you've got to have that view, that set of bellwethers. So one of the ways you can do that is to be able to look at how new technologies are intersecting the world of work. So look at a traditional job like a mechanical engineer, again, not a fast-paced changing job. Now you say, okay, and so traditional skill definition based on just how do employers, when they ask for mechanical engineers, what do they look for? That's on the left. Now you say you want your mechanical engineer to be involved in V2I. You can see the skills for that job totally change. It's like almost a different job, but it's still a mechanical engineer. Same thing if you start asking that person to be involved in autonomous systems. So if you can start to look at the bellwethers of those changes, then you can be much more effective in architecting your roles for that, in developing the skills within your workforce that you're going to need in the future. Part of that is also being able to create the right sets of peer benchmarks. So take the example here in the center of Volkswagen. Somebody from Volkswagen on this call. Their mechanical engineers are being defined by project management, purchasing, cost analysis, business planning. And then look on the right with Tesla. KDA, simulation skills, Python, material science. It's a totally different way of thinking about that job. And I'm not an engineer. I've never played one on TV, but I'm pretty sure I know which way the puck is heading on that ice, where the ball's rolling on that field. And so if you can look at those kinds of bellwethers, you can start the right conversation internally to your company to be able to say, how do we want to be thinking about our workforce going forward? Now, the normal way that we think about this is with competency frameworks, right? We're all familiar with them. Okay, to be an HR manager, you need knowledge of the organization, you need business orientation. That's nice. But it doesn't necessarily give you the granularity that lends itself to action. But instead you say, okay, look, there are sets of skills like, you may be asking about ERISA, but that's actually less and less important. Being able to comp and benefits person who can actually work in the HRS, huge rate of growth. Certain sets of comp strategy driven salary premiums in a significant way. Right? Being able to understand that becomes really critical, and part of that is having a taxonomy to do it. There's a bunch of free taxonomies out there, but here's the problem. They don't have the level of organization or dynamism or market context that you need. So, here's an example of how you define AI, right? Like this it can't be keyword driven. It has to be deeply organized and it has to be continually evolving. So I know this looks like read line 17 in the optometrist chart, so I apologize for that. But, being able to say, okay, look, we're looking at not just AI, but we're looking at natural language processing. Within natural language processing, we know lexical analysis and lexical semantics. Okay, now all of a sudden you see some, a new technology like, let's say, Antler or Moses or whatever, okay, the taxonomy needs to be able to evolve because it can see the correlations within them. As a result, get more and more thick. And it has to be able to provide you with the context factors around what's going on in the market for those. Where within a job does a skill make a job harder to fill? Where does it make it more future ready? Where does which skills are increasing in demand, and so forth. So I think, a useful thing to do here is to just show you how this can work within your organization. That's a good case here of Cisco and the pivot that they've increasingly been making to the Internet of Things. Hugely smart pivot for them. And as they started to undertake that pivot, there's a question like, okay, what does an IoT workforce look like? And so it's a totally, you're making a strategic pivot, but you need to understand a workforce strategy to understand a talent strategy to underlie that business strategy. And so they were able to do is first say, okay, well, first of all, we probably have a different set of peers from anyone we've thought about before. How do we find our way in that landscape to the peers who really are focused on IoT? And then what's the footprint of talent that you need to support that kind of strategy? What is the hiring of people who are really active already? Tell us about that. And then specifically, how are the roles changing, right? So it turns out that in the world of IoT, not surprisingly, you need a lot of network engineers. And for Cisco, that's, okay, well, they know about network engineers. Except network engineers who are working in IoT have a totally different skill footprint. And so, what starts out looking like it's very familiar and we're going to be able to do this really well, so then you realize that no, we don't need to know about lens and ones and others anymore. Increasingly, if you're a network engineer in IoT, you need Python, you need ML, you need Hadoop. It's a totally different skill set. And so that points to, what do you do with all this? Okay, so you've gotten that sense for where your workforce is going. You've got a data-driven view to it. You track the bellwethers. You've architected your roles. What you do with it ultimately is it helps you not only look beyond the walls of the company, but it helps you as well to think about how you change your skills. We talked already a little before about when you start mixing skills, you start creating shortages. And naturally, this is as skills evolve, these kinds of gaps are natural, both in terms of how long it takes for jobs to fill, how much it costs to fill them. Ultimately, you can arbitrage in your own workforce. Remember that Econ 101 thing of buy low, sell high? Well, the ability to take a worker who's working in, let's say a supply chain manager making about $70,000. Supply chain manager who's got SQL skills makes almost 20% more. Right? It doesn't cost you $15,000 to train somebody up in SQL. And so the ability to be able to see those adjacencies within your workforce, the ability to see which skills cause a premium enables you to say, okay, how do we develop a learning strategy, a promotion strategy, a mobility strategy that aligns to it? Right? And some of that's about looking at skills within roles. You can see here with big data architects. It's a hard job to start with, and there's certain, if you want your big data architect to know Kafka or Scala, you're going to pay a lot more. But some of it's actually then being able to say, okay, if I've got a genome of every job in my organization, now I can start to see adjacencies between the roles. So think about trying to find this one's fascinating. Think about a cyber analyst, right? There's a bunch of ways that you can fill a cyber analyst job when you start looking at the underlying skills and how you can capitalize on other pools of talent within your organization that might have the same skills. One of those that's really surprising is the bottom one here, a risk analyst. That's actually usually a treasury function. But what you find out is that a cyber analyst is not a cyber engineer, right? They're doing a lot of auditing work, of security auditing and process compliance evaluation. A lot of overlap there with risk. There's a set of skills that overlap. There's a set of skills that you need to add. You can train for that gap. You can train for the delta between the roles. And all of a sudden, you can take people from a more available, lower cost, sometimes more diverse talent pool and move them around. It also says, hey, there's new ways of thinking about versatility. This is from a consumer packaged goods company that was able to look at where they had the greatest overlap between their set of roles, and therefore how they could create a new strategy for remobilizing talent, and for where they could be most effective in hiring, and then where they could build from within. I want to finish on this and just a quick teaser. I know there's a conversation coming up in January on DE&I. This idea of looking at skill adjacency is incredibly powerful. Not only in being able to sort of come up with a richer workforce strategy, not only in being able to come up with new sources of talent to serve the shortages, to be prepared for future readiness, but also in being able to really meet ambitious diversity, equity, and inclusion targets. Right? Financial analysts are only 15% Black, Hispanic, or Native American, and it's a good job. Make $70,000 a year. Compensation analysts are almost twice as diverse, almost 30%. Paid less. Right? There's the skill gap between them is not that far. Right? They're different roles, but you can bridge that. Teach that compensation analyst and financial analysis and budgeting skills, and she can make the transition. So the ability for us to be able to understand the genome of our organizations, the genome of each talent pool, means that we can start mobilizing talent more effectively, create the strategy that comes to success. Start out with this whole idea of a genome. A genome is one that changes, right? Again, skills express the dynamism of roles, they express the distance between roles. And just like the roles themselves, we can adapt, and we can be much more successful in capitalizing the talent we have. Again, love to send you these slides if you want them. Al, I don't know if we've got time for any questions or to talk together, but
we do. Hey,
conversation.
Well, not only do we have time for a couple questions, but I want to invite you straight away to be a guest on my podcast, because there's a dozen questions, if not more, that immediately jump to mind. And I want to thank you for what you've done for the space. And I also want to just congratulate you, because you not only have brought a very complex topic into a very tangible, usable experience, but you have cleared the way for people to, how should I say, you have a language about it. I love the genome, I love the DNA. It makes it, again, where you landed on that with the adjacencies and our need to adapt, not only individually, but organizationally. I think it's spot on. So, I really want to give you kudos and your team there at Burning Glass. Yeah. All right, sir. As we wrap up, how can people learn more about Burning Glass and you individually, you specifically?
Well, look, always love to engage with folks. Email me. I'm Sigelman@burningglass.com, or just go to burning-glass.com and have a look around. We've got some great research on market trends as well as other kind of stuff. And of course, would love to engage.
Yeah, I'll second that. No, I love your work, your research, and again, what you've done for the community. So keep up the great work, and hope to see you before too long. You stay well.
Look forward to it. Happy holidays, everybody, and Happy New Year. Thanks so much.
Happy holidays. See you, Matt.